Go na. So, good morning, everyone. I am Nino Andrew Balmores Dayleg, your discussant for today. And for today's topic, we are going to talk about the analysis of the Great Gatsby using the lenses of the new historical criticism. Next slide. So basically, we're going to talk about the discourse of the self-made man, a new historical reading of the Great Gatsby. So F. Scott Fitzgerald novel The Great Gatsby was published in 1925, and the novel covers first-person narrator Nick Carraway's connection with unknown millionaire Jay Gatsby and Gatsby's desire to reconnect with his former sweetheart, which is Daisy Buchanan. So the central conflict of this novel is when Jay Gatsby attempts to rekindle his relationship with Daisy and win her heart. So the protagonist of the novel is Gatsby, and the opponent is Tom Buchanan, who is married to Daisy and is shown as an arrogant, aggressive man. So for our topic for today, we're going to view the this novel of F. Scott Fitzgerald using the new historicism. Next slide, please. So, new historicism is the approach that focuses on the connection between a work and the time that it was written. So, it also focuses on how the work reflects the beliefs and the problems in the society at the time which the work is set. So, next slide. Next slide, please. Okay, thank you. So, The Great Gatsby is a novel by Fitzgerald, and The Great Gatsby is about Gatsby, who is attempting to reclaim Daisy after she married a guy of greater social standing. So Nick's perspective is used to tell this story. So this story or the novel, Great Gatsby, was first released in 1925. And during the 1920s, the story takes place. So the narrative depicts many of the problems and beliefs that plague society in the 1920s. So as we go along in our discussion in analyzing this novel, The Great Gatsby, we're going to talk about the problems and the beliefs that depicts on the society during the 1920s, and it is shown through the novel The Great Gatsby. So next slide. So The Great Gatsby reflects the time it was written in because Fitzgerald had included some of the problem that were at the time. So next slide. There were many societal problems that Fitzgerald showed in his book. For example, excessive wealth, so prohibition and change in values. So next slide. For the first one, we will talk about the prohibition. Prohibition is when selling, manufacturing, and consuming alcohol was illegal. So during the 1920s, it was or during the 1920s when this novel was published, it was illegal to buy or drink alcohol, but it was very common to have alcohol in parties. So even when it was illegal, people drank alcohol, and many people get rich from having drugstores that sold alcohol. So in The Great Gatsby, alcohol was at every party that was held in his mansion. So This shows that drinking alcohol illegally was one of the problems during the 1920s. So, next slide. So, here are some of um, the lines from The Great Gatsby who shows this prohibition. Next slide. So, in the main hall, a bar with a real brass rail was set up and stacked with gins and liquors and weed cordials so long, forgotten that most of his female guests were too young to know one from another. So, according to this code, it was very common to have alcohol in parties, especially the luxurious parties like the ones that Gatsby held at his mansion. Next slide. The next line is he, Gatsby, and his Wolfsham bought up a lot of side street drug stores here and in Chicago and sold grain alcohol over the counter. So this code shows that alcohol was open to the public, so it was a problem during that time due to its being illegal. So you see that during that time, um, even it was illegal to buy or drink alcohol, um, it is common to use or use to have alcohol in the parties, as I have mentioned a while back, and as it depicts on our uh, novel, The Great Gatsby. So, next slide. The next problem that we have is the excessive wealth. So, what is this excessive wealth? So, after the World War One and before the Great Depression, many people got wealthy due to selling alcohol and or inheriting the money. So, next slide. So in The Great Gatsby, Fitzgerald demonstrates this by explaining Gatsby as a self-made millionaire and other characters like Tom Buchanan who inherited their money. So here are the lines from the retrieved from the novel The Great Gatsby. So next slide. So his family were enormously wealthy. Even in college, his freedom with money was a matter for reproach. But now, he'd left Chicago and come east in a fashion that rather took your breath away. For instance, he'd brought down a string of polo ponies from Lake Forest. It was hard to realize that a man in my own generation was wealthy enough to do that. So, this line shows that Tom, who inherited his money, was living a lavish life during that time, and this reinforces the fact that there was excessive wealth during that time. So, next slide. Okay, thank you. The lights grow brighter as the earth lurches away from the sun, and now the orchestra is playing Yellow. Tactile music and the opera of the voices pitches a key higher. Laughter is easier minute by minute. Spilled with prodigality, tip out a cheerful word. So this this line from the Great Gatsby, the novel Great Gatsby, demonstrate that during this time period, life was about wealth and lavish party. So with that, we can conclude that during that time, the person or the life of a person was um, around the wealth and lavish parties. So, next slide. So, the next problem that we have is change in values. So, next slide. The 1920s was the time when values started to change. People started to live better lives for more freedom and money. The jazz era started during that time, which was all about self expression, movement, and freedom. So, in the novel, Fitzgerald shows the just age and the change in values at the parties that Gatsby held. He also explained the new types of musics and clothing. So, next slide. So, these are the lines from the novel The Great Gatsby, who shows this problem changes in values. So people were not invited, they went there. They got into automobiles which bore them out Long Island, and somehow they ended up at Gatsby's door. So this quote explains the amount of freedom they had during the 1920s. So they could show up at any party and join in. So next slide. So Daisy's daughter, she was less than an hour old, and Tom was God knows where. Again, Daisy's daughter, she was less she was less than an hour old, and Tom was God knows where. So this is when Tom was having an affair with other woman. Fitzgerald included many affairs in this novel. So it was common problem thing during the 1920s. So F. Scott Fitzgerald novel The Great Gatsby is one of the America's most well-known works that the novel's success is owed not only to its rich material but also to its exceptional depiction of what life was like in the 1920s. So a new historicist reading of The Great Gatsby would recognize that the novel, as well as Fitzgerald, its author, was embedded within the social and economic realities of American life at that time of its writing. Such a reading might aim to reveal how the text came to be shaped by particular attitudes or assumption, or it might use the text to shed light on social relationship or to analyze the exercise of power within the 1920s in America. So next slide. So let us look for the questions for further practice, new historical and cultural criticism of other literary works. So the following questions are intended as models. They can help you to use new historical and cultural criticism to interpret the literary works to which they refer or to other texts of your choice. So your purpose in addressing these questions, the way in which you focus your essay, and your own self identified critical orientation will determine whether your essay is considered an example of new historical or cultural criticism. So, as we go along in these slides, um, we have these questions for you to guide in writing criticism using the new historical and cultural criticism. So next slide, please. So basically, we have some examples of story that use in this guide questions. So the first one, what is the relationship between how Thorne's depiction of Hester Parnes' transgression in thought and deed of repressive Puritan values in the Scarlet Letter in 1850, and such revolutionary 19th century activities as the abolitionist movement and the women's movement. In other words, how does the story of Hester Prynne, a colonial Puritan, embody and or criticize these 19th century ideologies as they were circulated in pamphlets, popular stories, political activities, and other cultural texts. Next slide, please. So the next one we have Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye in 1970, and it was published at the time when conservative American ideologies concerning race, class, gender, and social justices were being called into question in almost every domain of American life. So, what does the history of these novels reception suggest about the circulation of conservative and liberal discourses addressing these pressing social issues since the time of the novel's publication to the present. Next, next slide. So the third one, um, how was John Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath in 1939 shaped by, and how did it shape debates about the rights and responsibilities of workers circulating at the time the novel was published? For example, debates concerning the appropriate relationship among American business, government agencies, and the individual citizen. In other words, what kinds of cultural work did the novel perform at the time of its publication? Next slide. So the fourth one, in what ways does Kate Chopin's The Awakening in 1899 interact with the reproduce, comment on questions, debates about women's rights and responsibility circulating at the time the novel was written? For example, debates concerning women's suffrage, economic independence, marriage, and motherhood. And the last question we have, what is the relationship between William Blake's The Little Black Boy and 1789 and discourse concerning Africa and Africans circulating in England during the second half of the 18th century? So these are the questions, guide questions um, for you to be guided in doing a literary work or the criticism using the new historical and cultural criticism. So I hope that you learn a lot from this discussion. And next slide. So I hope that you learn a lot from this discussion and you will be guided in viewing a criticism using the lenses of the new historical and cultural criticism. That's all for my discussion. Thank you for listening and God bless us all. Have a great day ahead.